My name is Rachel Whitmore. I am 27 years old. Until 3 days ago, I thought that if I just loved hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and gave more than I had, my father would see me. Not just look at me, see me. That illusion was shattered when the attorney read the will, and I learned my father left my brother the vineyard, the properties, the shares, the house, everything. All I got was $5,000. A symbolic pat on the head, like a child who had done her chores and expected a thank you but got a sticker instead. It still doesn't feel real. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I just keep replaying my entire life, trying to find the moment where I failed him so badly he decided I wasn't even worth a second thought on his deathbed. But the cruelest part? I know exactly where I failed. I failed by not being Luke. Luke, the golden boy. Luke, the effortless charmer with a crooked smile and expensive taste. Luke, the boy who crashed our dad's Porsche at 19 and got a new car the next week. Luke, who got pulled out of a DUI because dad made a call to the sheriff he used to golf with. Luke, who the whole town loved even as he wrecked everything he touched. He didn't just walk through life. He floated. And I stayed behind, cleaning up his messes and hoping someone would notice. They never did. I grew up in Sonoma, California, on a 40-acre vineyard that's been in the Whitmore family for 3 generations. Our family business was wine, but emotions? Those didn't age as well. When my mom died of breast cancer, I was 10 years old. Luke was 13. She was the only softness in that house. After she was gone, something hollow settled in its place. My father didn't grieve so much as vanish into a hardened version of himself. He spoke less, drank more, and disappeared into long walks through the vines with his ever-present clipboard. Any warmth he had left, he poured into Luke. I, on the other hand, became useful. I was the one who made sure Luke ate breakfast before school. I packed Dad's lunch every morning for 2 years until I left for college. I handled the bills when Luke overdrew his accounts and cried to Dad for help. I spent the last 4 summers before college in a backbreaking haze of grape harvests, bottling lines, and labeling mistakes that no one ever acknowledged but everyone relied on me to fix. But none of that ever translated to affection. It translated to dependability, which in our family was just code for, do the work and shut up about it. The moment that still haunts me happened when I was 21, right after I turned down a prestigious summer internship at a marketing firm in San Francisco. I had been accepted into their mentorship program after 3 rounds of interviews. It was a huge opportunity, one that could have changed the trajectory of my entire career. But my grandmother, Dad's mother, had fallen and broken her hip. She needed round-the-clock care. Luke was on a yacht in Ibiza. Dad called and said, "I know you've got that city thing going on, but your grandmother raised me, Rachel. She needs family." So I packed a bag and went home. I changed her bandages. I cleaned her house. I cooked her meals. And every night, I sat on the porch with my dad while he smoked his cigar in silence and stared into the dark. One night, I finally worked up the courage to say it. I was going to intern at Elias and Keene this summer. I turned it down. He didn't even look at me. He just exhaled smoke and said, "Family first, always." I told myself that meant he was proud of me. He wasn't. That fall, at the vineyard's annual harvest party, a big, catered event with local investors and distributors, he gave a toast. Everyone was there. I was at the back of the crowd, still in my dirt-streaked jeans from working the bottling room. And I'll never forget what he said. "This family has its future in good hands," he began, raising his glass to Luke. "My son has the heart of this business running in his blood." The crowd cheered. Luke grinned and clinked glasses with everyone. I stood frozen, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres I wasn't even supposed to be serving. He didn't mention me once. Still, I told myself, he's old school. He shows love in other ways. Maybe it'll change. Maybe when he's sick, he'll need me. Maybe then, he'll see. So when he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer last year, I moved back in without hesitation. I took family medical leave from my job. I slept on the couch most nights. I managed his medications, drove him to chemo, organized his bills, coordinated hospice visits, and made sure he didn't die alone. Luke visited 3 times. Each time, he brought whiskey, drank half of it, and left after an hour. Dad never said a word about the disparity. He would light up when Luke walked in, like a tired old man who still believed his son might finally show up for him. I used to think Luke was the one getting the short end. He missed the hard moments. He missed the goodbyes. But I think now, maybe Luke got the better deal. He never had to confront what loving Dad really looked like. The night before he died, I stayed up late with him. He wasn't fully lucid, drifting in and out of sleep, but there was one moment when he looked right at me. His eyes were clear. "You were always good, Rachel," he whispered. "But Luke, he's going to need the vineyard. He's going to need the help." I remember swallowing my heartbreak and nodding, thinking he meant Luke would inherit the burden, the work, the legacy. I didn't know he meant everything. When the lawyer read the will, I sat next to Luke in Dad's old office. My hands were clenched so tightly my nails left crescents in my palms. Luke lounged in the leather armchair like he was watching a movie. The lawyer said the words without flinching. "To my son, Luke Whitmore, I leave the entirety of the Whitmore estate, including all vineyard holdings, real estate properties, and 100% of my shares in Whitmore Cellars Incorporated. To my daughter, Rachel Whitmore, I leave a one-time cash disbursement of $5,000. Silence. Then Luke let out a low whistle and said, "Guess he wanted to keep it simple." I felt something crack inside me then. Not loudly, quietly, like ice under pressure. I smiled and nodded, the way I always did. But something has changed. I used to think that being dependable was the best thing I could be. That if I kept showing up, eventually someone would see the value in it. But all I got was $5,000. And an empty house full of memories that don't mean what I thought they did. And now I'm going to make sure the world knows exactly what I gave up, and what they lost when they ignored me. Because I wasn't the favored child. I was the one they thought would never walk away. The morning after the will reading, I sat in the breakfast nook with my fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped coffee mug, the one my mother had used every morning before cancer turned her bones brittle and her breath shallow. The sunlight spilled across the old wooden table like it didn't know everything had changed, like it didn't care that my father had died and taken what little peace I had left with him. I stared at the check, $5,000, and tried to imagine what he thought I was supposed to do with it. Buy closure? Rent forgiveness? Frame it and hang it in the hallway like a participation trophy? Next to the check was the letter. One page, typed. No signature, just my father's initials at the bottom, like even in death he couldn't be bothered with sentimentality. "Rachel, you always took care of everyone. I know you'll be okay. Luke needs it more." I read those words 100 times that day, hoping they'd morph into something else, something that sounded less like a pat on the head and more like a goodbye. But they didn't change. They stayed flat, cold, transactional, like I was a function of logistics, not a daughter with grief and a heart still learning how to break properly. The funeral planning fell entirely on me. Luke was busy, so busy, he said, with coordinating a celebration of life and a brand alignment campaign for Whitmore Cellars. Apparently, Dad's death was not just a personal loss but a branding opportunity for the vineyard. He had hired a PR consultant from Los Angeles, a woman with bright white teeth and pastel-colored pantsuits, who used words like narrative strategy and viral potential without a hint of shame. She wanted photos of the vineyard bathed in soft golden hour light, drone footage of the guests releasing doves, and a custom hashtag Live Like Leland. I wanted to vomit. Instead, I sat in my old bedroom for hours, sorting through funeral home catalogs, floral arrangements, and obituary drafts that Luke never even glanced at. When I asked him about pallbearers, he shrugged and said he figured I'd know who Dad would have wanted. When I mentioned the music, he waved a hand and said to keep it low-key, but not boring. I didn't cry that week. Not even once. I couldn't. I was too busy making sure the casket was the right shade of walnut and that the headstone didn't spell our last name wrong. I was too busy coordinating catering menus and calling extended relatives who hadn't spoken to us since Mom died. I was too busy doing what I always did, holding the crumbling foundation together while the favored child picked out Instagram filters for a eulogy. The memorial was held in the main courtyard of the vineyard, of course. Dad would have hated it. He was never one for spectacle. But Luke had already posted a teaser video 2 days before, complete with dramatic orchestral music and a slow zoom on the old grape press our great-grandfather built. There were over 200 guests. Rows of white folding chairs stretched across the lawn, each one with a tiny program and a commemorative pin with Dad's initials on it. A string quartet played covers of Dad's favorite classic rock songs, and someone from the local paper showed up with a drone. Luke wore a custom navy suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons undone, hair styled like he had walked straight off the cover of Wine Spectator. He made a speech that was just long enough to be emotionally manipulative but short enough to go viral. Something about legacy, passion, and building on the shoulders of giants. I stood in the back. No one asked me to speak. No one even asked if I was okay. That night, when the last guest finally left and the vineyard lights dimmed, I walked to the office, the one Dad used to call his sanctuary. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the old leather chair, the dusty books, the framed photo of him and Luke at the Napa wine auction in 2017. There were no photos of me. Not one. I sank into the chair and let my hands fall onto the desk. The letter was in my bag, and I pulled it out again, reading the line that had started the slow rupture in my chest. You always took care of everyone. He didn't mean that as a compliment. He meant it as an excuse. I was the one who gave up internships, skipped vacations, missed parties, and declined job offers to be there. I was the one who handled the books when our accountant ran off with a portion of the tax fund. I was the one who rewrote the company training manual when Luke hired his college buddies as shift supervisors and nearly tanked our operations for an entire season. But none of it earned me a share. None of it earned me his name on paper. All I got was a ghost of approval and a quiet instruction to keep being strong. 3 days after the funeral, I met with the estate lawyer again to finalize paperwork. His office was cold, windowless, with a faint smell of printer ink and expensive regret. I need to ask, I said, my voice cracking for the first time in days. When did he sign the new will? The lawyer looked up from his desk, his expression shifting into something cautious. It was amended the evening before his death, he said after a long pause. Mr. Whitmore asked for a notary and requested privacy. I felt the air leave my lungs, slow and sharp, like being punched underwater. Luke was the only one with him that night, I said. The lawyer nodded, eyes avoiding mine. That is correct. And you're sure he was in a state to make that decision? Another pause. Then, very carefully, he was alert, coherent, weak, but aware of the document's content. I can provide the notary's notes, if you'd like. I didn't answer. I just stood there, nodded once, and left the office. That night, I couldn't sleep again. My brain wouldn't shut off, wouldn't stop cycling through the 100 little moments that suddenly looked different. Luke offering to take care of things so I could rest. Luke insisting I sleep at the house so he could handle Dad's last night. Luke bragging at the memorial about carrying the torch. It wasn't grief making me paranoid. It was grief opening my eyes. The message came the next morning, a DM from an old vineyard hand named Julian who had worked summers with us for years before leaving suddenly last fall. We'd never been close, but he'd always been kind to me in a quiet, protective sort of way. It was short, blunt. You should look into what Luke did that night. Ask around. Start with payroll. Be careful. My hands trembled. Something had happened. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like being quiet anymore. I didn't start out trying to expose a fraud. Honestly, I just wanted peace. I wanted some quiet justice that would let me close the door on this whole nightmare with my dignity intact and my father's memory preserved, even if only in my own mind. But grief is a strange thing. It clears the fog just long enough for you to see all the tiny cuts you've been bleeding from for years. And once you start looking, you can't stop. Once something breaks open inside you, it doesn't close the same way again. Julian's message kept echoing in my head like a heartbeat that wouldn't align. Start with payroll. I didn't know what he meant exactly, but I knew where the records were. I had access to the vineyard's shared admin drive. At least, I had used to have access. I sat at my laptop for over an hour that night, trying old passwords, old logins, digging through archived emails for links to systems I hadn't touched since before Dad got sick. Eventually, one worked. The main vineyard payroll system opened with a cheerful green login screen that felt oddly insulting under the circumstances. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, so I searched for everything. And there it was, on the night before Dad died, a special check cut for consulting services to someone named Claire Danvers. Amount, $1,500. Payment reason, end-of-life transition planning. I didn't recognize the name. No contact info. No contract. Just a line item and a timestamp that put her at the vineyard around 9:47 p.m., the same time Luke told me Dad was too weak to eat. I googled her. Nothing. I cross-checked the notary's signature on the amended will with public registry records. That name was there, but the last officially filed work from Claire Danvers had been almost 2 years earlier, according to state documents. That's when I started to panic. My hands went ice cold, and my breathing got shallow, and for a full minute I thought maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I was seeing ghosts in ink. But deep down, I knew better. Luke had always counted on my fear of making waves, on my obsession with playing fair and keeping the peace. He bet everything on the hope that I'd be too quiet, too responsible, too alone. So I called a lawyer. Her name was Sheila Grant, recommended by a friend who knew her from an estate case that got messy a few years ago. Sheila had the kind of voice that made you sit up straight, not unkind, just efficient, like she didn't have time to soothe you, but would fight to the death on your behalf if you gave her a reason to. I met her at her office, a quiet converted Victorian with soft lighting and very little small talk. I handed over a folder with what I'd found, payroll reports, signature comparisons, and a copy of the will. She read everything twice before speaking. "This is not a legitimate document," she said bluntly. "It could be, but it reeks. The notary logs are inconsistent, the payment is unrecorded, and there's no legal record of the amendment being filed prior to your father's death. The estate executor should have caught that." I felt something loosen in my chest, a tangle of rage and relief and sorrow so thick it almost choked me. "So what do I do?" I asked. "Can we contest it?" She nodded, slowly. "You can. But be aware, this will not stay private. If we challenge the will, especially with this kind of irregularity, it becomes public record. The vineyard's reputation could take a hit. Investors might pull out. Employees might walk. Your brother could face legal consequences, maybe even criminal ones if we prove forgery." I swallowed hard. "Would I win?" She paused again. "I think so. But it would destroy him." The next day, I received a message from an unknown number. The text simply read, "You're playing a dangerous game. Let it go." No name. No follow-up. I didn't respond. But I didn't sleep that night either. The following weekend, I drove to Santa Rosa to visit my Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister. She had stayed somewhat distant from the family business over the years, always showing up for weddings and holidays, but never engaging in vineyard politics. She lived in a small craftsman house with overgrown jasmine crawling up the porch rails and wind chimes that never stopped moving. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she didn't ask why I'd come. She just said, "I've been waiting for this." I didn't even get a full sentence out before my throat closed and I started crying, ugly, shaking sobs that had been living under my ribs for weeks. She pulled me inside and sat me on the couch, handed me tea, and waited until I could breathe properly again. "I know what he did," she said quietly. I didn't have proof, but I knew. "How?" I asked, stunned. "Because your father was always weak where Luke was concerned. And Luke knew it. Your dad loved him blindly, not because Luke earned it, but because he needed to believe one of his kids was made of magic. You were strong, Rachel. You were always strong. He didn't worry about you. He didn't see you, because he relied on you." She handed me an envelope, old, yellowed, addressed in Mom's handwriting. "It's a letter your mother wrote before she died. She asked me not to give it to you unless you ever doubted yourself. I think now is the time." I read the letter in the car. And it broke something I didn't know was still intact. "Rachel, I see how hard you try. I see the way you hold this family together. One day, they'll realize you were the reason we didn't fall apart. You are not invisible. You are not the backup plan. You are my legacy." That night, I told Sheila to move forward. I would not be quiet anymore. Filing the lawsuit felt like detonating a bomb and then choosing to stand very still as the shockwave moved through everything I'd ever known. There was no drama, no shouting, no cinematic declaration of war. Just paperwork. Dozens of pages with my name printed in bold letters, accusing my own brother of fraud, coercion, and unlawful manipulation of our father's estate. I signed them in silence, my hands steady, my heart racing with the kind of quiet panic that only comes when you finally step off a ledge you've been hovering on for years. Once it was filed, it moved quickly, too quickly, if I'm being honest. News of the suit leaked within a week. At first, I thought someone from the courthouse had spoken out of turn, but then I realized it was Luke himself. He was trying to control the narrative before I had a chance to tell the truth. The local papers ran with it, crafting headlines that framed the story as a bitter inheritance feud between siblings, peppered with phrases like family betrayal, vineyard empire, and succession scandal. I stopped reading the articles after the first one called me embittered and estranged. The vineyard's social media pages were flooded, half with support, half with venom. Longtime customers threatened to boycott the brand, demanding answers about the sudden shift in leadership. Distributors paused new contracts, worried that the legal mess might taint their own reputations. The PR consultant from Los Angeles vanished overnight, leaving behind an email that basically said, "Sorry, we don't handle litigation crises." Luke was furious. He filed a countersuit for defamation, claiming I had maliciously orchestrated a campaign to damage the Whitmore brand for personal gain. I still remember sitting across from him in our first court-mandated mediation session. He wore his usual charm like armor, cracking jokes with the legal staff and acting like this was some minor misunderstanding that would blow over once I cooled down. He didn't even look at me until I spoke. "You forged a will," I said, my voice low but clear. "You used Dad when he was dying, when he couldn't think straight." Luke's smile faltered then, just a flicker, but it was enough. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic," he said. "It's why no one took you seriously." That sentence echoed in my head for days. But the truth didn't care how Luke felt about my seriousness. Because once we went to court, the truth had to stand on its own. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sitting in that cold, fluorescent-lit room while lawyers dissected the past year of my life like it was a medical specimen. Luke's legal team tried every tactic in the book. They painted me as jealous, bitter, emotionally unstable, incapable of understanding the complexities of estate law. They claimed Dad's decision was perfectly legal, motivated by sound judgment and a desire to leave the vineyard in visionary hands. But Sheila was ready. She called in witnesses, not just former employees like Julian, but family friends who had seen Luke whispering in Dad's ear during his final weeks. Hospice nurses who testified that my father was heavily medicated on the night in question, barely responsive, barely coherent. A handwriting analyst who flagged inconsistencies in the amended will's signature compared to others filed that same year. And then came the journals. I hadn't known they existed. I don't think anyone did, really. They were found in a locked drawer in Dad's study, uncovered during discovery by the court-appointed estate trustee. They weren't polished or profound. Just short entries, scribbled in the margins of legal pads and vineyard notebooks, his handwriting shaky, but legible. "Rachel came by today. Made soup. Stayed with me until I fell asleep. I never tell her how much that matters. Luke says he can handle the business, but he doesn't understand the people. He forgets they're not just employees, they're family. Worried I've leaned too hard on Rachel without giving her the credit she deserves." I wept when I read them. Not because they changed anything, but because they proved I hadn't imagined it all. I hadn't been invisible. I had just been overlooked by a man too afraid to say he'd made a mistake. The will was declared invalid. The judge ordered a reinstatement of the previous version, a 50-50 split, including joint ownership of the vineyard, shared control of the business assets, and equal rights to the family estate. On paper, I had won. But victory didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a burial. Luke refused to speak to me after the verdict. He stormed out of the courthouse without a word, his jaw tight, his lawyer trailing behind him like smoke. He moved out of the main house a week later, leaving behind a few suits and a half-empty bottle of whiskey on Dad's old desk. His room still smells like cedarwood and resentment. I haven't gone in since. Then the money laundering came to light. A routine audit, prompted by the court's decision to freeze and examine all business accounts, revealed a shell company Luke had set up 2 years prior, registered under a pseudonym, funneling vineyard profits into private investments. It had been minor at first, small siphons, little transfers that didn't raise flags. But by the end of last year, he had moved over $700,000 out of the business and into a dummy corporation based in Nevada. When the court confronted him with the records, he didn't deny it. He just said, "It was going to be mine anyway." Those words gutted me. I thought the worst part would be losing the will. But the worst part was realizing my brother had never once considered me his equal. Not even close. I had fought beside him for years, and he'd spent those same years building an escape plan that left me behind. Extended family started calling, but not to offer support. No, they wanted explanations, apologies, reassurances that this drama wouldn't drag the family name through any more dirt. My uncle, my mother's brother, told me he admired my guts, but then added, "You probably should have just let sleeping dogs lie, Rachel. Family's supposed to stay united." I don't feel united. I feel like a fracture line. Every day I walk into the vineyard, and it's like wearing someone else's coat, familiar, but ill-fitting, and heavy with a scent I can't scrub out. Employees who used to smile now glance away. Customers whisper in corners when they think I'm not listening. I've been accused of killing the legacy even as I try to salvage what's left of it. But I sleep at night. I sleep because I did what needed to be done. Because justice doesn't always look like peace, but it always looks like truth. And I told the truth. It's been exactly 1 year since the court invalidated the will and split the vineyard down the middle like a ripe pomegranate. One half to me, one half to Luke, though in practice, he hasn't set foot here since the day he walked out of that courtroom, shoulders tense with disbelief and eyes full of something I still don't have the right word for. Not regret, not shame. Maybe just exhaustion. Maybe he was always exhausted, in the same way a tornado is tired after tearing through everything in its path. I never wanted revenge. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. I wanted fairness. I wanted to be seen. I wanted the family business to reflect the kind of values we used to whisper about over harvest dinners: community, resilience, integrity. Words that got buried under marketing plans and shareholder presentations. I wanted to make the vineyard something more than a brand. I wanted to make it mine. So I did. It wasn't easy. Nothing ever is when it comes to rebuilding something broken, especially when half the people working for you still remember when you were just the quiet daughter who filled in spreadsheets and handled invoices while your brother made speeches in the barrel room. Some employees left, some stayed. But the ones who stayed saw the changes. I raised wages for seasonal workers. I reinstated sick leave. I created a hardship fund for employees with medical emergencies or family crises. I made sure the people pruning the vines and scrubbing the fermentation tanks felt ownership over what we were building. We also started a community tasting program. Once a month, we opened the gates to anyone from the local area for free tours and educational wine sessions. It's not just about marketing. It's about erasing the old idea that wine is only for the elite. It's about making something sacred accessible again. I live in the guest house now. The main house still feels like too many ghosts in too many corners. I keep it clean. I unlock the doors for annual inspections. But I don't sleep there. I don't think I ever will again. As for Luke, after the audit and the criminal investigation started gaining traction, his world imploded fast. He was arrested, processed, and released on bail within 72 hours. He vanished from social media. Mutual friends stopped mentioning his name. The local press ran one story, then another, then another. And then, like everything else in this industry, it moved on. I don't know what exactly broke him, but 6 months ago, I got a call from our Aunt Caroline. Luke checked himself into rehab, she said. Voluntarily. I didn't know how to feel. I still don't. I didn't write him. I didn't visit. I didn't pray or curse or journal. I just sat with the knowledge the way one sits with a splinter, aware of it, but unwilling to touch it too much in case it goes deeper. But then, 2 weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail. It was addressed to me in handwriting I hadn't seen in a year, but still recognized instantly. Sharp loops. Hesitant strokes. Inside was a 3-page letter. No greeting. No flourish. Just words that looked like they'd been dragged out of him with forceps. I did it. All of it. You were right. That was the first line. What followed was not poetic. It was not a masterpiece of remorse or a soliloquy of transformation. It was raw, disjointed, sometimes ugly in its honesty. He talked about the night he had the notary sign under the table. About how Dad was barely responsive, how he whispered the script to him, how he justified it to himself by telling everyone, Rachel's strong, she doesn't need it. He wrote, I didn't just steal your inheritance. I stole your father's last chance to make things right. He ended with, I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who deserved to hear it. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote him back. My letter was 10 pages long. I wrote until my hand cramped and my back ached and the words stopped feeling like poison and started feeling like closure. I told him everything I had never said out loud, that I hated how I always needed him to love me, that I hated myself for still wanting his approval, that I missed him, that I didn't trust him, that I wanted him to get better, that I wasn't ready to forgive him, that I might never be. I folded the letter. I placed it in an envelope. I put a stamp on it. And then I left it in the drawer. Not everything needs to be sent. Sometimes the act of writing is the closure. Yesterday, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in over a year. The cemetery sits on a hillside that overlooks a portion of the vineyard Dad never sold, wild, untamed, brambled with forgotten vines. I brought her a bouquet of irises and a bottle of last year's vintage, the first harvest I managed alone. I poured a little into the grass and sat down beside her stone. I did it, I whispered. I kept it alive. The wind rustled the trees like she was answering. As I sat there, I thought about legacy, not the kind etched in stone or carved into corporate logos, but the kind that lives in the hands of the people who work quietly and love fiercely and refuse to let bitterness be their inheritance. The kind that continues not because someone wrote it in a will, but because someone chose to carry it forward anyway. Back at the vineyard, we have a new intern this season. Her name is Alina. She's 20, wide-eyed, meticulous, a little too eager to prove herself. She reminds me of who I used to be, the version of me that thought good work would always be enough. Last week, I found her staying late in the bottling room, meticulously labeling every bottle by hand because she didn't trust the new print system yet. You don't have to prove anything, I told her gently. She smiled nervously. I want them to know I belong here. I looked at her and saw myself. And I said the words I wish someone had told me when I was her age. You already do. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Luke will recover, if we'll ever share a meal again, if the wounds we've made will ever fully scar over. But I know this, I'm not waiting for anyone else to give me permission to be okay. Closure isn't a verdict or a signature on a legal document. Closure is the decision to stop bleeding from the same wound over and over. And I've made that decision. For my future. For my vineyard. For me.